A federal judge in San Francisco weighing a monumental decision today. Did President Trump overstep his authority when sending the California National Guard to respond to protests and support immigration enforcement in Southern California? Under federal law, the military is barred from performing law enforcement duties within the U.S., with a few exceptions. Our Lauren Toms joins us now to explain why this case could now dictate how the president uses the National Guard in cities all across the country.
Well, Ryan, it was a short trial with big implications as attorneys for Governor Newsom and President Trump faced off in a federal courtroom right here in San Francisco. A federal judge heard witness testimony from a military leader and an ICE supervisor on the proposed and activities of the National Guard's deployment to Los Angeles. These were scenes that haven't been captured on American streets in decades. Humvees rolling into Los Angeles, National Guard troops in full gear. The federal government says they were there to protect ICE agents and secure federal property. But California Governor Gavin Newsom says it was a show of force designed to intimidate. The question, was it legal? CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson says Judge Charles Breyer must now weigh how those troops were utilized.
This breaks down essentially into two big questions. The first is whether or not when the National Guard and the Marines were on the ground in Los Angeles, did they actually cross that line from a supporting role to directly enforcing domestic law? And then the second is, if they did, was there some exception to the Posse Comitatus Act that allowed them to do so? Over the course of 3 days, Judge Breyer heard arguments from the state that Guard troops provided armed perimeters, created roadblocks, and in 2 cases apprehended civilians, which they say violates the Posse Comitatus Act, the nearly 150-year-old law that prohibits military troops from engaging in local law enforcement. They essentially said that the statute that the president used to try and federalize the National Guard, that does not amount to an exception of the Posse Comitatus Act. But attorneys for the Trump administration defended the deployment, arguing the troops were brought in to quell civil unrest during immigration protests and add protections for federal assets that local authorities couldn't provide. Under a section of Title X that the president invoked when he federalized the National Guard, what the federal government was arguing is that's enough to allow them to then enforce federal law. Retired Colonel Brendan Kearney, who served in the Marines for more than 30 years, says there are times when troops are justified on American streets. And for the soldiers themselves, it's all part of the job, but warns that the purpose matters.
If the military can be usefully used, not for symbolism, but usefully used to back up law enforcement, to allow law enforcement in the criminal justice system to catch their breath, catch up, and start taking care of some of these bad actors that we have, and we got lots of them. Let's get them in jail and let the National Guard, the federal troops of their use, let them go back to what their regular jobs are. During the trial, Judge Breyer pressed attorneys for the Trump administration on what limits exist to regulate the Guard's deployment as the president tests the boundaries of his authority. Judge Breyer's decision could shape how federal troops can be used in U.S. cities at any time. Judge Breyer seemed fairly skeptical of a number of the arguments that the federal government was making in defense of their actions. I think it's important for us to remember that when Judge Breyer does issue a ruling, obviously that could be persuasive when it comes to other federal judges in other areas, in other jurisdictions.
Now, Jessica says the decision is highly likely to be appealed and make its way up the courts to the Ninth Circuit and possibly the Supreme Court. But depending on how Judge Breyer rules, it could have sweeping implications for how and how long troops are deployed right now in D.C. and potentially even here in the Bay Area after Trump suggested a deployment to quell crime and homelessness in Oakland. His ruling can come at any time, but Ryan, it is not expected immediately.
Yeah, not expected immediately, but any guesstimate of when it could happen? Could it happen by the end of the summer, end of this year?
It could happen even tonight, but that again is unlikely. I would guess if I had a crystal ball, it would come in the next few weeks.
And like you said, this is far from over. This is likely going up to the top.
True.
All right. Thanks, Lauren.